Would AI have moderated the Trump-Harris debate better than the folks from ABC? Hi everybody, my name is Greg Crable and this is my podcast, Something I Learned Yesterday, where I take one issue, often from the world of publishing, and try to explain it in 3 or 4 minutes. Now, I usually try to avoid political topics on this podcast, but today's Friday the 13th, so all bets are off. Bosak's posted an article about how news organizations could use AI to fact-check politicians. I don't really like the term fact-check to begin with, but that's another topic. It makes some interesting points. The article makes some interesting points, and I agree that AI is a useful tool. I use ChatGPT all the time. However, this is the response I posted to this article on LinkedIn. That might be lovely if media organizations actually cared about holding politicians to account. They obviously do not. Or rather, they only hold their ideological opponents to account. Fox News will fact-check Harris, and ABC will fact-check Trump, but even then they lie. Also, the proposed remedy overlooks the bias inherent in AI itself, which has been established repeatedly. The bottom line is that we have to come to terms with the fact that there is no such thing as objective, honest media. It simply doesn't exist. You have to know that what you're hearing is slanted, biased, opinion-based so-called, quote, news, and just to do the best you can with that. Oh, and I forgot to add another factor. Pay attention to who the advertisers are on news stations. It's still true that who pays the piper calls the tune. So that's what I posted on LinkedIn, but I wanted to elaborate on it a little bit. It continues to astonish me how many people live in a news-generated bubble and don't realize it. Don't we all know this by now? Don't we all know that news organizations have an agenda? If you think otherwise, you're really not paying attention. When I say they have an agenda, I don't only mean a political agenda. That's certainly true across the board. Every news organization has a political agenda. But they also protect their sponsors. You won't see critical exposés done on the people who are paying the bills. So can AI solve this? It's a computer, right? Like Data on Star Trek. It's objective. It doesn't have an agenda. Ha ha. You don't really believe that, do you? If so, once again, you're not paying attention. It doesn't take long to find the bias in AI systems. I've done some previous shows on that. So what can you do given all this bias everywhere? The first and most obvious thing to do is intentionally expose yourself to sources that you hate. Now that alone won't help because there are different ways of listening. You can listen with the intent to rebut, which means you haven't really done anything at all. Or you can listen with the intent of understanding that point of view. That's very hard to do, but often it's worth the effort. Now, when it comes to AI, rule number 1 is to check everything you hear because sometimes AI makes things up. They call this hallucinations, and I think they do that maybe to humanize the process a little. Sometimes you can get past these hallucinations by simply asking, is what you just told me accurate? It seems amazing that that technique works, but it often does. Now, from what I know about the underlying technology, there's no inherent bias in how large language models work. They simply assign multi-vector values to words and phrases so it can essentially do math on language. But there's often a kind of superego that sits on top of that and filters the results, and that seems to be where the bias comes in. The trick is to get past that superego. When you're asking AI a controversial question or a question about a controversial issue, there are ways to overcome that bias. You can prompt the AI to answer the question from the perspective of certain people. That works pretty well. For example, what would Thomas Sowell or Paul Krugman say about raising the minimum wage? You can also ask something like, what are the main criticisms of the position you just mentioned? You can get some surprisingly insightful replies with that sort of technique. But the bottom line is that there's bias everywhere you look, everywhere. It's completely inescapable. You just need to develop some techniques to work with that. So that's my thought for today. I hope it was helpful. If there's some way I can help you with your business, please give me a call. You'll see my contact information on the next page. Thanks so much.